Hello, everyone. From AdventuRise, this is Venturing Beyond 9 to 5, and I'm Nimi. Thank you so much for tuning in to season 2 of our podcast. And in this season, we'll be sharing with you our conversations with experienced freelancers and really interesting individuals across many different niches. So welcome. I hope you enjoy it. Just to preface, AdventuRise is a career development platform for freelancers. And if you'd like to talk with and learn from mentors and other freelancers, then you can join our free community at theadventurise.com. And you can also follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn to stay updated. But today, I'm really excited to welcome Karthik Sridharan onto our podcast. So welcome, Karthik. Karthik is a co-founder of Flexible and Build.co. He's a big believer in bootstrapping startups, and he's actually grown Flexible completely self-funded up to $3 million in revenue. So this is amazing, and I'm really keen to learn more about this, but welcome. It's wonderful to have you here.
Oh, my pleasure, Nimi. Thanks for having me. I really love it. Look forward to this conversation.
Yeah. I think you've definitely had a pretty interesting career journey, right? So I'm curious to hear more about it, right from your mouth.
Sure. I am an engineering grad. I graduated from BITS Pilani in 2012 and did nothing in engineering after that, as most of the engineers do. I immediately shifted into investment banking. Worked in JP Morgan for about 3 years, couple of years in India and Mumbai, and then one year in London as well. And it was there in London where I felt that it wasn't the journey for me, and it wasn't an industry that I wanted to work in. Long hours, something that I was not passionate about. Not very happy, and overall, I just felt that I need to find something I'm a lot more motivated to do day in, day out, and for the rest of my career. And definitely investment banking was it. So I came back to India and felt that maybe an MBA school might give me some bit of time to explore what I wanted to do next. So that's what I did. I joined IIM Ahmedabad in India, and as you might know, the MBA school, typically the very first week is all, they immediately start talking about internships, placements, CVs, and so on. And I felt that I just left that life behind me. And I tried to find something. And maybe it was a bit immature of me to expect that the MBA school would give me such an environment, but it felt a little against what I wanted to do. So, yeah, I quit the internship placement process and felt that I could explore building something of my own. Not that I felt that that would necessarily be the thing I would want to do, but I just wanted to explore it. And that's when the journey of Flexible started. I researched through a lot of different ideas. Had an idea book where I used to note different ideas and get my friends to critique it in my room, and critique they did. And Flexible was one of the ones which got the least amount of criticism. So it was also in the B2B industry. I wanted to work in that space versus the B2C industry, where I felt building something would need huge amount of VC funding and a lot of rounds forever. So it really resonated with me in terms of what was happening in the startup ecosystem at the time, which was really booming. A lot of startups raising a huge amount of funding. So Flexible was in the space which would help them solve their talent problems, which they were having in plenty. And instead of looking at the talent problem from trying to understand how we can help them find employees easier or in a better manner, I felt that we could possibly look at it in from the perspective of a different source of talent. And that's where freelancing came as one of the options that we should look into. And specifically tech is where I wanted to focus, because I felt that tech hiring was a really big problem for startups, and especially because most startups were tech in nature. And I also felt that early on, if we have to choose the categories, development and design would possibly be more amenable to freelancing, to remote working, and that's what we started with. And there were already big players in the market, and we just felt that freelancing sort of suffered a bit in terms of the credibility of freelancers, in terms of the trust between freelancers and companies. Companies felt that freelancers might leave their project in between and run away. Freelancers feel companies will never make payments on time or maybe never make payments at all. So while there were already marketplaces, that were around, we felt that quality and ensuring that a quality intermediary can ensure quality at both the ends would solve some of these problems, and it would possibly unlock talent who would have never considered freelancing, and also unlock companies who would have never considered hiring freelancers as well. So that was the take, and that's where Flexible's journey began. And it's been 7 years since I first started, but 5 years since we officially started after IIM-A. So yeah, it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, definitely. That's really cool. And that's kind of one of the main reasons why Karthik is such an interesting guest, right? So far on the podcast, we've been really looking into the freelancers perspective, but you work directly with the businesses and with clients. So looking at it from that perspective, I think it'll be very interesting. And
Sure.
I kind of want to know more about what problem you're trying to solve with Flexible, right? I know you make hiring remote tech talent really easy. So what kind of made you start the venture in this space, and what exact problem statement are you trying to solve?
Right, sure. So it was about making hiring freelance tech talent easy. And obviously, I think as we've been in this space over a period of time, that has sort of just broadened a bit, and we want to make hiring talent easy. And that's where Build.co also comes in, where we want to, in the future, if we succeed, also do something in the permanent job market. But with Flexible, it was all about making hiring freelance tech talent easy, making it reliable, ensuring that they're able to engage with really quality professionals. I think the problem that we set out with, and given that I already alluded a bit to that a bit earlier, which was that there were a lot of marketplaces in this industry, and there are still a lot of them, and they're really big in nature. If you talk about Freelancer and Upwork and so on, and I think around Upwork has of course been there for quite a while, but even around the time that we were starting, there was a lot of Uberization, so to speak, of various different models, right? Not necessarily in the freelance industry, but every industry was trying to see how they can make an unorganized sector organized by using the Uber kind of model of a marketplace. And our thought process to it was that it possibly works when the skill sets that are being offered on the marketplace are not nuanced or not too complex, right? So it works in the Uber space where it's driving, and where the engagement between the companies and the talent, which in this case, I know the Uber's case would be a driver, is very short, right? It's just about half an hour, a 1 hour drive. So in that case, a Uber model works. You have star ratings, you have reviews. All of those things are enough to ensure that there is a fruitful engagement possible between the two parties. As the skill set becomes more nuanced, more complex, more heterogeneous in nature, we felt that the Uber model doesn't necessarily work. So you can't just, start a marketplace, get the two parties together, and say, okay, find your counterparty through the product. We felt that you need an intermediary who can actually ensure the kind of quality engagements that are going to happen through the particular network. And things like reviews, ratings wouldn't be a fair judgment of the kind of the quality of the engagement that they're going to have. So you need a neutral party, third party, to actually have an absolute evaluation of both the parties together. And then you can actually have a fruitful long-term engagement between the two counterparties. So that was the sort of premise that we started off with. And it's held to a large degree, because I think the kind of companies that we work with currently, and the kind of talent that are associated with us and are a part of our network, don't use Upwork or any of those kind of marketplaces to sort of source their projects, so to say. Because even from a talent perspective, it's really painful, right? Like if you are on Upwork, you have to like bid on hundreds of projects, and each time you don't know the quality of clients you're going to be interacting with, you're unsure about it. While Upwork does work on ensuring that there is a certain milestone based payment that is getting released, etc. I think from a quality talents perspective, a lot of time is just invested in getting the project rather than doing what they really love doing, right? Like for developers, you don't want them to be marketers marketing themselves on Upwork, right? And selling, being a salesperson who gets projects for themselves. So that was the perspective from the freelancer side, that we wanted to ensure that they work doing things that they really love doing. And we take care of the marketing, we take care of the admin side of it. We ensure that the contractual obligations, invoicing, the payments happen on time. We get them leads, we get them companies that they talk to. And these are really companies who are very relevant to the kind of skill sets that they possess. So that was the narrative from the freelancer side. And from the company side, we didn't want them to be pouring through hundreds of resumes either, right? And we wanted it to be a very streamlined process where they look at 2 to a maximum of 3, freelance talent at any point of time, and they have a very focused discussion with them and can immediately hire them. And even there, we sort of offer a couple of weeks of a risk-free trial so that it works out best for the two, because I think freelancing is a lot more than about skill sets. So even if the skill sets match, sometimes it might not be a cultural fit. So we give them a couple of weeks to figure whether it will be a cultural fit or not. So these were a few things that we sort of found along the way, and we're trying to ideate and come up with solutions that might actually solve those problems.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And you mentioned at the end, right? You mentioned about helping clients with the shortlisting process and matching them with the right freelancers. Can you actually talk a little bit about the vetting process? What do you look for when you shortlist freelancers? And
For sure. So I think there are a few different things. Of course, we are human beings, so it's really tough to immediately parameterize people and do it. But yeah, we're in the hiring business, so we have to do it to a certain extent. So I think very broadly, it's two parts. One is the hard skills that they possess, right? Like if you're a developer, you need to actually know development, and now development itself is such a huge world, right? Like as in software development, there's just so many technologies, and the number of technologies just keep increasing every single day. So one is on the hard skill side of it, and the other side is the softer aspects of it, right? Because I think versus a permanent employment, I think freelancers really need to nail the soft skills aspect of it, right? Because a lot of the times, of course, our world is becoming more and more remote now, and even permanent employees need to up their game on the softer aspects. But as forever, freelancers have been working remotely with clients, so being able to uh, communicate what they're working on in a very streamlined fashion, being able to structure their thoughts, being reliable in whatever they promise and actually living up to it. And these were like things that you would sort of take for granted, but are not necessarily things you should take for granted, because uh, what we have recognized over our last 5 years is that most of the times engagements fail not due to mismatch in skill sets, but it fails in mismatch in terms of the culture and the expectations, and a lack of communication, or like the communication breaking down between the two parties. So I think our entire process is aligned to get as much of information from our freelancers as possible on all of these metrics. So we start off with generally just getting them to talk about their own selves in as structured a fashion as possible. So we try to see if people are able to talk about their past work in a written format, and then we actually have a very quick call. Now we have made that very recently, just last week, we made that a video sort of submission that they need to make, where we try to understand if they're also able to talk about it in a very structured fashion. Because a lot of it, which is being able to go on client meetings, communicate your work that you've done for the past few weeks, how well you do that, how well the other person is able to understand what you've done. So you should be able to dumb it down, so that you're not being using too many jargons, but at the same time able to quantify the impact that you personally are making. So these are all the kind of things that we try to understand. And mainly, versus a resume where you can claim to have actually built the entire tech of Uber, right? Like, and then on the call we try to ascertain whether that's actually the case, or what was your individual contribution to it. So that's what we try on this introductory call, which has now become more of a video submission. But then we have a very final, hard tech call with one of our set of interviewers. So they have a very in-depth discussion on any one of the past projects that our freelancers might have worked in, and then they have a live coding session where we give them a couple of problems to solve. Uh, Not so much to see if they're able to arrive at the correct answer, but more to see the thought process. More to see the thought process that they go with when they're trying to solve a problem. So it's more about the problem-solving ability, because a lot of times, a lot of freelancers, and so to say, even us in general, right? We encounter problems that you have not faced in the past. So it's about being able to break it down and see if you can, find solutions to it, and what your thought process to approaching a unstructured problem is. So that's the entire process. Then we try to get a couple of references from them, from their past clients, to see whether it checks out, and then we try to build their resume ourselves along with them, so that we can actually showcase their skill sets in the best possible fashion.
I think the very ending there was a little bit of delay. Is
Okay.
anyone able to hear it fine?
Do you want me to repeat the last part? There was a delay.
Yeah.
Okay. From which part would you want me to repeat?
Pretty much the last sentence. I just want to make sure it wasn't just on my side.
Oh, sure. So it's pretty much that, and towards the end, we're just trying to get some KYC documents, do some basic background verification, because now we're not only in India, we're across various different countries. So ensuring that, things that people claim on their resume, as much as we've been able to vet through our interview processes, it actually checks out through a proper background verification as well.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And we've also, as we've been reading about freelancing and about marketplace business, we've kind of been thinking about what does it actually mean to do a hard skill assessment, especially for something like when there is subjectivity involved, right? For example, if you do design, it's on each person's opinion, right? How do you kind of manage for that? It must be quite difficult.
Yeah, that's true. I think, for example, in software development, on the developer side, there is less of subjectivity, I would say. There is a lot more objective input that you can get. And there are very specific analytical problems, and there are very thought processes that are very quantifiable. Of course, it's subjective even there. But overall, I think what you're looking for is people who know what they're talking about, right? And it's not so much only about design. I would say that about any particular function, and ultimately, I would like to be flexible to expand into other categories as well beyond development and design. So the thesis is that if someone's actually worked in a particular space and they claim to have done certain amount of work, if you really deep dive into it, they should be really able to logically answer why they did what they did, and what were some of the very specific challenges that they faced, how do they solve for it, and how do they interact with other people to get the right answers. And overall, the entire process of actually building something should be an experience that they're able to describe with great amount of detail and accuracy. So it's not so much, even when I described the live coding session, it wasn't so much about whether they can answer. It was more about the thought process and whether they're able to actually guide us to how they're thinking about the problem, right? And whether the problem is logically being broken down into smaller pieces, and whether they're able to logically approach it or not, right? So I think the same holds true for design. I think there's a lot of subjectivity in general about design, and that keeps evolving, right? Like there is a true answer today, and then a year later, that kind of design is already dead, right? And no one seems to agree that that's the right way to design websites or products. So I think the ability to learn, the ability to logically break down the past things that you have done and pick up new things, and how you're able to discuss it, structure your thoughts, all of these aspects sort of reveal the kind of person you are, the kind of effort you put in to sort of do things and learn things, etc. And of course, it helps to get some references from your past clients, where it shows whether you've actually lived up to what they expected from you and what you promised to them. So I think it's a mixture of different things, and each process in our each stage in our process serves and doesn't answer the question entirely. It answers it partially, and that's where we need various different stages. And you hope that all the stages together give you a full answer, a comprehensive answer, so that you're able to make a good recommendation to the clients.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I also like the point you made about, I think you kind of implied this in the sense you have people talk directly with the freelancers to kind of understand if they have one thing in terms of kind of this personality and soft skill basis. So it must be quite difficult to scale that, right, on a long-term basis. Like, and you also talked about having a talent pool of the top 1% tech developers and designers. So yeah, how do you gauge skill levels in that sense?
Right. So I think in terms of scale, my view of scale is very, very different to what's a popular narrative. I think scale is a very relative concept and has been made to look at as a absolute concept, right? Like, so for us, it was never about when we were at the idea stage, it was can we reach, let's say, $10,000, right? Like, and then it was $100. Hello? You guys,
Yeah.
did I get stuck there? No, I'm audible, right? Like, cool. So no, so it was largely about thinking of the next order of magnitude, right? So when we were at 10,000, we thought only about 100,000. When we were 100,000, we thought of a million, and now we're at 3 million. We think about maybe 15 million or so. So at all points of time, we have not thought of how do we make this a unicorn, $1 billion company, and stuff like that. So for us, skill testing has also been such that we do justice to the problem that we are solving, rather than whether we can always think about whether this can be a scalable model as such, right? And we trust we trust our ability to a certain extent that we'll be able to problem solve to be able to get to the next level of scale. So that's a certain amount of assumption that we have. Having said that, I think when we talk about the introductory calls where we understand the soft skill aspect of it, we were earlier actually having one-on-one calls with everyone and trying to gauge their skills, and it was done till even late last year, right? And as I said, we've slowly transitioned to video submissions of these interviews so that we can now gauge it asynchronously, right? Like, and it doesn't have to happen at the same time. So it helps us now that there doesn't have to be a coordination between the freelancer and us. We can actually judge the videos and evaluate them at our own time. So that sort of opened up a bit of the next level of scale for us. From the and from the tech interviews perspective, which I said is the final interview that we have, there initially all interviews were taken by the three founders, and we did all of the interviews till a lot of time, till early last year actually. And it's only in the last year that we actually formed a pool of interviewers from our extended network, and then now we have our own freelancers who have become part of the interview network of us. So our freelancers who are part of our network, whom we have already vetted and who have worked with us, now help us vet the new freelancers who want to join our network. So it's no longer again bottlenecked by the bandwidth that the three of us founders bring to the table. So I think this again allows us to scale in a certain way. So for us, it's always been such that we're able to find some of these solutions. I don't know if this will indefinitely be possible or not, but at this point in time, I feel we're possibly there, and we should be able to evaluate those skill sets. I think the second part of your question was around how do we ensure top 1% quality in terms of talent. I think it's largely down to the vetting skills that we have and the long screening process that we have. So there are people that pass through and who get rejected in every stage of the screening process, and it's nothing against them. I think what we feel is that we have a certain kind of clientele, and we want to ensure that it's a success. And for us, success is not just making money, but success where both the parties who are involved, are both our customers who are freelancers and companies, also have a fruitful engagement with each other, right? So I think that's what we want, and that's what we optimize for. And the
Yeah.
entire screening process actually helps us get that.
We actually have a question from the participants. Ganesh Ram says, "Hi Karthik, I've been following you on Twitter for quite a while. I work as a content lead for an early stage startup, and I would love to know more about your thoughts on how you scaled marketing at Flexible. And while your threads are really valuable, I'd love to hear from you as well. Is there a quant-based marketing strategy that you recommend?"
Quant-based. Hey Ganesh. So I think so. We are first-time founders, so we didn't know much about marketing. We didn't know much about anything about building startups, to be very honest with you. So it's been a lot of progress through hundreds of mistakes that we've made. And initially, the first year, it was no marketing. It was all sales, outreach, using our personal network, using LinkedIn. And that's where we realized that possibly some of our clientele in India are not necessarily our right target audience, and we possibly need clients in the US, in the UK, etc., to be our clients on the company side. So for that, we recognize that we need marketing, and we slowly started looking into platforms like Product Hunt, where we slowly launched a few of our products. And we figured that we just didn't have to launch Flexible. We made side projects which might be helpful for a target audience, whether they're freelancers or tech startups. And we kept launching them on Product Hunt, and only to recognize that we hadn't diversified our marketing at all, and it was all dependent on Product Hunt. And as you would also recognize, Product Hunt can be really unreliable a lot of times, right? And we recognize that as well. And again, we went back to the drawing board, and we sort of looked at other channels. And it was SEO and Google Ads that we tried then. And Google Ads was ultimate failure. We sort of invested in it for 6 to 8 months. We burned through a lot of money, and not a lot, as in lot from our perspective, being bootstrapped. And we recognize that for us to be successful in that channel, we need to invest a lot of money and be able to compete at the same level some of our bigger competitors were doing. So we sort of shelved that particular channel, and we went into SEO full on. And it took us quite a bit of time. As you would know, SEO takes a lot of time, and it was a bit of trust in the process that it would bring us some kind of success. And it took us about a year and a half before we started seeing some kind of improvement. Our traffic at that time was about 4,000, I think, visits a month. It now, I think last month we finally hit 300,000 visits or so a monthly. So I think SEO has been a big part of it, and a certain part of it also was as recognizing that as a bootstrap startup, we don't get easy PR as much as VC funded startups get. So we don't get featured on TechCrunch that easily, right? So we were also very social media averse people, the three of us. No, none of us had social accounts whatsoever. So at that point in time, we recognized that we were doing a disservice to ourselves. And we had to tell our story, hold our narrative, and we forced ourselves to get on LinkedIn and start being a little more active, get on Twitter, telling our mistakes, sharing a few successes, celebrating our milestones. And I think that sort of resonated with people. I think they like bootstrap startups, understanding that they're possibly the underdog in the market, and they want to root for them. So founders just have to give them the reason and hold the right kind of story. And we did that, I think, to a decent degree. And that's also helped us, and that's started generating a good number of leads for us as well. So apart from this, it's been word of mouth, which I don't think you can plan for. So when people tell me word of mouth is the best channel, I think it's right. I wouldn't disagree, but it's not a channel that you can prepare for a lot. You just have to ensure that you build a brand, you do all the right kinds of things, but then word of mouth just kicks in, right? And of course, what we control a lot more is customer referrals and repeat customers. So we ensure that we optimize for success at all points in time. rather than just optimize for our own internal metrics. So that has meant that a lot of our customers have stayed through for a very long period of time, and they hire more and more talent from us for long durations of time, and they also make reference. So it's
Yeah,
largely been SEO. Sorry, just to summarize. So SEO, Google Ads failed, product hunt sort of failed, and then it's been social media, and now customer reference and word of mouth, I guess. Yeah.
I definitely enjoy your LinkedIn posts, and I've seen you on Twitter as well. So really
Yeah.
good job on this. And maybe we'll come back to this, but I quickly want to go into what we talked about in the beginning about like looking from a client's perspective.
Mhm.
So from your experience, right? Generally, what's like the first thing that a client looks for in a freelancer's profile? Like what makes them curious about, getting on a discovery call with them, say?
I think a lot of clients, not to be unfair to them, come with very unrealistic expectations. So I think the first thing that they try to come up with is very specific experience, very relevant to what they're doing currently. So I don't know how many of the listeners currently understand tech entirely. So, but just to sort of give an example in that, say they talk about Angular JS, which is one of the JavaScript frameworks, but they'll talk about a very specific version of that particular framework, and then they'll say that we also need them to have worked in this particular industry on such kind of a product, right? So it becomes super specific to an extent where it's not realistic anymore, right? So I think for us that's been I don't know how helpful that is to know such a thing, but I think for us a lot of the initial talks is to bring them to the grounds of reality and to tell them that every engagement, every relationship, uh, there has to be a certain amount of upskilling or like context switching that a freelancer will do, and you need to trust on their past work to be able to uh, trust that they would be able to make that kind of context switching, right? So if they've worked in Angular, let's say 7, then you need to be able to trust that they'll work on Angular version 8, and that if they have worked in a certain industry, they'll be able to do similar kinds of problems, solve similar kind of problems in your industry. But specifically, I think when we try to make, so the reason that we make resumes for all of our freelancers and not just share the same old PDFs or whatever they share with us is to ensure that we are able to show them in a very organized format, ensure that very basic things, right? And you'll be surprised how many people don't follow that. There is no hygiene in terms of having no grammatical errors in your CV, right? It sounds so obvious that you shouldn't mention it, but there are so many people who make mistakes in that, and your individual contribution is rarely mentioned in it. It's talking about what the product does versus what you did for the product, right? So we focus a lot on being able to say that when this person worked in this particular company, these were the exact things that they achieved. So what was their impact, what is the feature that they worked on, and how did the feature help the company? So I think what in essence that we try to project, and what it's been a function of what clients want, is being able to gauge exactly what a person has done, then being able to articulate it in a really structured and accurate format, and also be able to evaluate then that the person has actually done the work and is not claiming to have done very unrealistic things. So I think
Yeah.
we try to do all of this and give them information in a very structured format. I think these
Yeah.
things help the clients get confident enough to get on a discovery call.
Yeah, I can see how useful that would be. And yeah, I've definitely like come across many resumes which have can be easily improved in that sense. But
Mm.
maybe like to switch it up, what are the unrealistic expectations that freelancers may have? Like what may they be getting wrong?
Um, I think when we talk about freelancing, right? Like people think that uh, it's the lifestyle super far away from a typical employee kind of lifestyle, right? That and there are so many photos and pictures shared on LinkedIn, but maybe more on Instagram, which is all about working in with your legs dipped in a pool with a pina colada next to you, and you're chilling and working remotely out of, I don't know, some really scenic spot.
On a
So I
hammock.
think it sort of sets, yeah, I don't know, it just sort of sets very wrong expectations that that's the kind of lifestyle that you're going to have, where you have such flexibility and that people are not expecting any kind of reliability from you, right? And that's the kind of expectations that we try to set the right expectations in our process, but also try to get people who have such expectations to say either get on board, or possibly flexible is not the right platform for you, right? Not to say that there aren't such engagements, but most companies want reliability, right? So the fact that you're getting location yeah, flexibility is a part of it, but at the same time you need to be super dependable. When you say share a certain deadline, you need to share your output at around that deadline. And it's all about being able to develop that kind of trust between the two individuals, and that happens both ways. So having the mindset that freelancing suddenly means that you're going to have a blast and money will come any which way is something that I've seen a lot of freelancers who possibly get rejected on flexible. That's possibly one of the main reasons. So not having the right kind of mindset or the right kind of expectation from freelance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, what about what do clients usually think about when it comes to pricing their services? Because I know that many early stage freelancers are convinced like when you start working to build your portfolio, you need to charge lower rates. And a lot of marketplaces that exist, like the large ones, really focus on this kind of competitive pricing, right? And on the other hand, there's a lot of freelancers who have many years of experience, or they can show that they've worked for so many years and they can charge a really high margin according to that, and which may or may not reflect on their expertise. So what do you think the pricing of a service indicates for the clients? And yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so. It's again tough to homogenize the entire thing. I think it's very contextual to a large extent. I think it varies by geography as well. There are clients who are super budget. They have super budget constraints and they're very budget sensitive. And there are some who come to us and say that we have no budget constraints and it's all focused on quality, right? So but then as I said, they have very unrealistic expectations on the specificity to which they want the kind of talent that they want, right? So it's an entire spectrum in that way. But talking specifically about the example that you gave, where very early freelancers with not much of a portfolio, should they work at lower rates? I'm not sure, right? There are a few different things. I think if you want to really work in the high quality segment of the freelancing market, and that's true about any particular market, right? Like it's an entire spectrum. There will be people who cater to startups where it's not necessarily a startup, it's an individual working on a side project and you're helping them build, so they're not going to have a big budget. So yeah, you have that segment. And then you have a really well-funded VC startup which is going to want quality. So which segment do you want to play at? And I'm assuming that most would want to play in the latter, right? So from that perspective, I would say it would make sense to maybe even work in the traditional industry for a few years, right? Build your portfolio, not necessarily freelancing, but build certain kind of experience, maybe add a couple of brands along the way working in the industry. That would surely help. It's nice to be a hipster and say all that doesn't matter, but we need to align with certain realities. And I'm just sort of highlighting some things that might help people find success in the freelancing world as well. I know my friends who graduated from BITS, who worked in really good companies, then freelanced, and now one very specific person, for example, now he works in Google, and he chose to work in Google because he realized that he sort of hit a ceiling with the kind of clients he could possibly work with. So he wanted to add one extra brand to his resume before he gets back to the freelancing market. So I think there are these kinds of approaches that one can take to build their portfolio in a certain way, rather than just saying that, okay, I need to work for dirt cheap rates, right? And secondly, I think now more than ever, people like to work with like just sort of slightly contradicting what I just said, apart from brands, I think people would want to work with those who are able to showcase that they have skill sets. Right. So it doesn't necessarily have to be on projects that you worked for someone else. It can be projects, your own personal project, your own passion project, but you market it well. Right. So if you're a designer, show the kinds of things that you are building. Like one very popular example, I don't know if you guys have heard of him, is Pablo Stanley. So he does amazing work. He was part of InVision, and now he has his own company that he builds. But he's been building so many side projects of his, and it's been so much of just passion projects that he builds on the side that I'm sure people would just love to work with him as a freelancer. And I could make the same case for developers. I could make the same case for writers. Just if you want to showcase that you're really good at a particular skill, you don't necessarily have to do that for some other client. You can actually make your own personal pet project and share that with the world, contribute to it regularly. It's your skill, so you're anyway passionate about it, so you might as well do it for free for yourself and enjoy it, and then showcase that as one of the amazing things that you have done. And social networks, as much as I spoke about for Flexible, and social media was an important way to drive our narrative. I think freelancers need to consider themselves as a one person startup, right? And you need to market yourself and hold your own narrative in the market. And as you're able to build your own personal brands in the market, freelancing might not necessarily just be about all the kinds of clients that you've worked with, but might actually be with all the amazing work that you've done for yourself, and why people might want to associate with you. And personally, I have hired a few people because I felt that they did some really amazing work on social media and I wanted to work with them. So I think the narratives are changing. It's about whether we are able to hold on to them or not.
Yeah, that's definitely like an interesting perspective. And I've also feel strongly about that, right? Being able to kind of take care of things yourself. And it's such a interesting perspective on like, it's kind of like you're building a portfolio, except with your own projects that you're doing out of your own interest and passion, right?
Right.
That makes sense. I have a question for you, just personally.
For sure.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, as freelancers may develop their marketing skills or end up moving towards solopreneurship of sorts, what about platforms like Flexible, which help with marketing and connecting with clients, right? So what kind of do you see in that direction?
So I think, at the end of the day, see, if developers are able to build their personal brand to a level that they are able to get projects, and that happens today as well. It's not a futuristic tone. There are a lot of developers who have such amazing personal brands that they're always inundated with projects, and they have more projects that they can take on. They get so many projects to take on. So I think Flexible is not for them, right? Like, so platforms such as us are not necessarily for them. It's for the people who don't want to be involved in that, right? I know tons of developers who just really dislike being on social media and like sort of talking about themselves, who don't want to market themselves on even platforms like Upwork. They just want to work on their art, work on their skill, and then enjoy life, right? So I think there will always be such individuals, and Flexible will help them. And it's I would be really happy if some of our developers also recognize the need for a personal brand and actually go and build a personal brand, and such that they don't need Flexible anymore, because that would encourage more freelancers to, like, more individuals to pursue a freelancing career. So it will be a net positive for Flexible as well. So I think, it would be very myopic of me to like sort of think in a way that, okay, freelancers shouldn't market themselves. So I absolutely believe that they should. And that's what I'm trying to project here as well, as in build your personal brand, build your personal projects, showcase them. And then you will realize that freelancing is a really viable career for you, and that you can possibly build a good lifestyle where maybe possibly you work 9 months of the year and 3 months of the year you're chilling somewhere because you made enough money for the entire 12 months. So is it an easy journey? Definitely not. And that's where, as I mentioned a little while earlier, don't think about freelancing as something that you can do while hitchhiking all the time and stuff like that. I think there is a certain amount of responsibility that you need to take up that you take up when you take up freelancing. So I think it's a world that definitely is going to explore a lot more of freelancing, and that's only going to be beneficial for companies like Flexible. And if even in the case that more developers are able to build their own personal brand and they don't need Flexible, I think kudos to them. We'll have to figure something out such that we are relevant in such a market.
I was also wondering, like, uh, when you started out as Flexible, right, as a marketplace, how did you kind of approach that chicken and egg problem that kind of exists where,
Yeah, so it's tough. I think it's tough with any marketplace. And I don't know, I haven't heard an elegant answer till today about the chicken and egg problem, to be very honest with you. I think, if I had to really, the most, I'll tell you what we did, and that's not innovative at all. And I'll tell you what could possibly have been a smarter solution, right? So what we did was we just begged and begged freelancers to join us and begged companies to work with us. Right, so that's what we did. And if we approached hundreds of people, maybe 5 people worked with us, 95 rejected us. Right, so it was about being able to get the first 5 to 10 people to work with us, and then showcase their successes as testimonials to be able to get the next set of people. So initially, when you have no one's going to buy your story. So it's going to be more of a brute force approach where you're working more on volume and expecting some low percentage of conversions. And that's what we did. It's not a very nice solution. It's not a nuanced solution, but that sort of worked okay for us. And that's possibly one approach that people can try. And I think the one thing that we were smart about in that after a couple of failed attempts was that we weren't trying to onboard thousands of freelancers, right? We were just trying to onboard a few freelancers. And unlike a platform like Upwork, etc., a few freelancers also meant that we would make a lot of money for Flexible, so we would be able to survive, right? So that kind of business model also aligned with the successful outcomes that we wanted for our 2 customers. So having said that, I think another way to approach it is I would not think of this as building a marketplace at all, right? I would say that if you want to build let's say, a Flexible for content writers, say for example, right? Like instead of for developers, you want it to be for content writers or something, right? So I would think of myself as a content writer, like if that's the skill that I possess, and start taking up content writing projects and do really well, and then start marketing myself to a degree that I get so many content writing projects that I can't do all of them myself. Then I would pass a few on to a few other people, and then a few other people, and then a few other people, such that slowly I have an entire network of people who take up projects with me marketing. So I just stop writing, taking up and doing projects myself. Now I'm solely the person who markets this particular offering and gets people in. But initially I survived because I was the person writing projects and doing things myself. So I think if you own one side of the entire chicken and egg problem, you own one of the sides, which is not going to be the company side in this case, it's going to be the service side of it, then I think you can possibly solve the chicken and egg problem. It is possibly the slower way to do things, but it's a surer way to get things done.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach, Pusha. Another thing that I was curious about, right, is we talked earlier about what clients look for in a freelancer. I'm kind of curious about what they immediately put brakes on if they see in a portfolio, or if they,
in a portfolio.
In a portfolio, or if you talk to the person or on their profile or website. So what?
Yeah, I think it's got to do with the software aspects. Of course, see, everyone wants a fit in terms of hard skills at some level, right? And various clients have like there is a spectrum where a client is a little more open. Like again, I am sorry, I'm in the tech space, so I have to give some examples in that space. But let's say they want a Salesforce developer. They feel that Salesforce as a technology is very similar to Java, so they're open to hiring a Java developer who picks on Salesforce. But there are clients who are very specific as well. So you have people on that particular spectrum. But a big, question mark for them comes in, and a signal is uh, when freelancers are super unreliable. So for example, you commit to something and you don't deliver on it, right? Because this entire thing actually happens, it's an entire trust equation, right? And it holds, the trust equation is on both the sides, right? The moment the freelancer doesn't get paid at the time that they were promised, it's a red flag for the freelancer as well, right? That I don't want to work with such a client. And similarly, for the client, it's a big red flag if a freelancer commits to something and doesn't live up to it, right? And it could be something very small, right? It could be something like, you work on a small assignment, say during the screening process. You say that I'll give it to you by 6 p.m. on a certain day, and you end up giving it at 10, or you end up not giving it at all, and then I have to follow up and ask you where are things. Or you commit to coming to a call, a video call where we would possibly have the initial conversation, and you don't turn up, and then you say, oh, oops, I forgot about it, I'm sorry, right? So these are like big red flags for people, because in essence what people are doing in the screening process are trying to find proxies for how the engagement will be if they start working with that person. So they have to magnify small instances and look at how that might play out in a regular engagement, right? So it's better not to give them reasons which would look possibly out of context, but they have to make those kinds of assumptions. So I think on the client side, it would be total lack of reliability, which is the biggest red flag that we've seen clients sort of get really pissed off with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, to be honest. And like when you're a freelancer, you're kind of selling yourself, right? So if there's any kind of, and
Correct.
I've heard a lot about having this kind of relationship with the client as well. So if there's no, as you said, trust and kind of understanding between the two parties, and everything kind of just falls apart. And
Yeah, it is, and that's and it's a two-way street, right? And the client needs to do their part, the freelancer needs to do their part, and we tell our clients as well, right? At the end of the day, if you want the freelancer to really invest into this relationship, you have to also do that. So you can't have a double standard in terms of the way you engage with talent within your team and the way you engage with your freelancer. So treat them as a part of your team so that they think that you're a company that they would also want to grow, right? So I think it's a two-way street. So the trust equation keeps adding up. And it needs to be constantly reinforced on both the sides. So I think of it as a trust bank, right? So you can't keep withdrawing from a bank to a level that you've totally bankrupted yourself. So there's only so much that the other person's going to be understanding about things.
yeah, I think we're slowly coming to the end of the session. So, final question. I'm curious about your thoughts on the future of freelancing in India specifically. So, from the hiring side as well, like, as well as the supply side. So,
right. So actually, we were very positive about remote working itself from I think 2018. And that's why we started Remote Tools, Remote Plan. And of course, Remote Plan failed as a startup for us. But we were very positive about remote working. And we felt that in the next decade, a majority of the audience is going to be working remotely. Right. And I think freelancing versus remote working is a very thin line. Right. You have the gig economy, which typically was supposed to be maybe the shorter duration projects that talent and companies associate themselves with. But there is then the talent economy, which is where Flexible is trying to make its space, which is long duration projects between talent and companies, right? And we have had projects which have gone on between the two for even a couple of years, and that is much more than what even employees stay at companies on a permanent basis. So I think the line is very thin between freelancers, the way that we are working, and how permanent employees work. And when you start adding the remote working aspect to it, it becomes actually very, very blurred. So I think, of course, what we were thinking was never that in 2020 there'll be a pandemic and things will actually get accelerated to such an extent. So the world has become a lot more remote now, right, than we could have ever imagined. So remote working is definitely going to grow. And the way I think about remote working and freelancing, as I said, it's a blur and it sort of just gets together. I think
Sorry, one sec, Karthik. I think you're muted.
yeah, I think someone muted me by mistake. No worries. Uh, yeah. No, I was just saying that I think remote working is going to grow. More of talent is going to want to work remotely, and companies worldwide are not going to want to be restrained uh, in terms of hiring only from a very specific location, and would want to dip into the talent pool across the globe, which is already happening. I'm not stating anything which isn't happening actually, but that's where I feel that even freelancers need to think of themselves as, contract remote workers, maybe, right? Look at long-term projects, because I don't know, like I have not freelanced myself. I've only been in this industry, but I would imagine that constantly switching from one client to the other would not be such a enjoyable process. It's good if you enjoy working with this particular person. So, and having some kind of reliability on that. So if that's the case, then the only difference between you and a permanent employee is actually just semantics, right? So I would think of it in that fashion. So I think the future of freelancing is going to be very bright. People's personal brands are going to be very important. The way they are able to project themselves is going to be skills greater than, just brands. So pedigree and stuff like that. So own your own narratives on social networks, or showcase the work that you're doing, work on your own passion projects. And I think freelancing, remote working is going to be really empowering for all of us. In India, maybe a little, like, it might be a bit delayed versus the West. I feel we're not that open, and like as a nation, I think we're a little less trustworthy. And it's not to say, like, I don't want to generalize again at the entire nation level and homogenize us in that fashion. But yes, I think it's also a case of companies feeling that they can find talent who will work in office, who will work on a permanent payroll kind of situation. So yeah, I think, but India will also get there, and I think the freelancing market is going to be really bright across the world, and India won't be left behind in that.
Yeah, for sure. You already can see like more people hearing about the term freelancing itself, right?
For sure, exactly.
I think it also comes back to the point you mentioned earlier about trust and reliability. I feel like in India, it's like developing as well on both sides, even from the client side, that reliability is just starting to come through.
Yeah.
Just personal opinion, though, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think we can close the call now, but thank you so much for sharing your interesting opinions.
Oh, thanks a lot, Nami. Yeah, thanks for having me. I had a lot of fun.
So Rutu just mentioned she shared the link to AdventuRise and the link to our Instagram here. And Rutu's also shared a short feedback form. It's really short, so if you can fill it out, it'd be really great. I also want to ask you, Karthik, if you have any announcements to share.
No, nothing as such. I think very specifically, if I have to make one, we've just started Build.co. You mentioned Build.co is one of my companies, but it's an infant, right? Like, it's been only 3 months. It's largely my passion project and our passion project. So after Flexible, this is one that we have indulged in. We feel we really connect with entrepreneurs and everyone in the startup ecosystem. So we just want to share all the things that we have learned along the way, all the mistakes that we made, and share some of our learnings, etc. So that's what Build.co is about. We want it to be the place where people learn how to build startups. And I think people will really enjoy the content there. We write a bit differently because we have a very different take on how startups are built. So I think people might enjoy it. So yeah, maybe take a look at that.
Yeah, definitely take a look at that. I really enjoy your writing on social media at the very least. So
thanks, Nami. Very kind of you.
And like the startup culture is really taking off in India as well, right? So
absolutely, it is. It is.
So yeah, thank you so much for joining, Karthik. Thank you for getting on the call with me. And yeah.
Cheers, Nami. Cheers. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thanks. To everyone who joined, please fill out the feedback form. And if you're a